A while later, the girl screamed that she was perfectly fine and asked that they all stop torturing her. The Archduke, who came in after work to check on her condition, was shocked by this. He told one of the doctors that he thought the girl still had no strength, but Esther shouted that she was fine. She just hadn't been seen in a long time. So, at the Archduke's request, the doctor examined the girl and said that there were no external problems, but just in case, he decided to continue the examination. At this point, the girl thought that at this rate she would get diseases she didn't even have. After that, the girl looked at the doctor, and they sat like that for a few minutes. When that time had passed, the doctor said that, fortunately, no abnormalities had been found, but she is very thin and weak for her age. So he advised that they need to take care of her, and then everything will be fine. But Esther didn't listen to the doctor's advice. Thought that look was very familiar. It was full of the contempt she was used to in the temple. But she didn't understand why. So she assumed that it was us to the doctor someone had said something. When the doctor left, the girl apologized to the Archduke for worrying over trifles. He sat down next to her and said that he had already told her that she didn't have to apologize. When the girl wanted to object, Devon explained to her, "Esther, I don't know about the temple, but our family is grateful already that your well-being has been confirmed," he said. He then said that this was the reason why she should not apologize for anything or worry about anything. Esther thought that these were very affectionate and warm words for her, so the atmosphere of contempt immediately disappeared. She began to reproach herself because of her worries, but in response the Archduke said her very warm and caring words to her. So she thanked him for that. She felt so warm for the first time in her entire life, and it made her want to cry, but she held back to keep Devon from worrying. When evening came, the Archduke sat in his study and looked out the window. It was raining heavily outside, and he wondered how his children were doing. If he didn't have so much work to do, he would go straight to them and do something. His assistant noticed that the Duke looked like he wanted to quit work right now and go to his children, but he wasn't surprised that it was raining so hard. At this point, Devon reflected that the girl looked troubled even in the temple. After his reflections, he turned to his assistant, Ben. But before he could ask, a maid immediately came into their room. He immediately asked what was wrong. The maid said that Madame's condition had suddenly worsened, so Devon immediately ran to Esther's room. When he went in, he saw her lying on the floor. The girl asked who it was that came in. He replied that it was the Archduke and everything was fine, let him calm down, then asked what had happened. The girl asked that he kill her. She can't breathe. She's scared to live, so she really wanted him to kill her. At that moment, the girl had an idea. Not from the past. When she was still in the temple, and she was in the dungeon, a girl came in and said it was raining hard today. It was Lavienne, she told Diane, but because she knows she's not in the mood on days like this, so she wants the girl to help her get rid of her anger. Esther sat on the floor and said that she had been wrong and apologized to Lavienne. She begged her not to do anything because she was in so much pain, but the Archduke did his best to make the girl come to her senses. He soothed her and asked her if she knew where she was now. Esther said that she was now in the temple, in the basement, but Devon answered her that she was not in the temple, but in the Archduke's house. When the girl realized she was safe now, she apologized for the noise. She was always locked in the temple, and when it rained, Lavienne. But she immediately interrupted herself at these words and said that she had had a bad dream, so it was nothing. The Archduke was angry and did not understand what was even going on in that temple. After a while, he took the girl in his arms and said that until the thunder subsided, he would be there for her. She would be very scared alone, so he could stay with her. The girl was surprised to hear this and said that he had a lot of work to do. Devon replied that he could work here too, to make her feel more comfortable. With these words, he put her on the bed. Afterward, he asked Esther if anyone in the temple had bullied her. The girl was surprised at this question, but quickly answered that she had not, and that everything was fine. Then the Archduke asked her when she began to be afraid of thunder. The girl replied that it was a long time ago. When Devon saw that the girl was already falling asleep, he said that he did not know what was in the temple, but in this house, no one would dare to harm her, and if anyone did, he would protect her. So he wants her to be calm further because she's safe now. She has nothing to be afraid of anymore. But then suddenly Judy came into their room. When he saw his father, he was surprised and asked why he was here. The Archduke asked what he was doing in Esther's room and why he was awake. The boy replied that the thunder made him very worried about Esther, for she could easily have been frightened by it. Afterward, Judy came closer to them and asked her father that he was worried about her too, right? When he came closer to the girl, he asked why her eyes were so red and assumed that she had been crying. He then said that if he had already come, he would protect her and offered to sleep together. When he lay down next to the girl, the Archduke said that on rainy days they could sleep together. The boy could not believe his happiness and asked if it was really possible. The father replied that yes, but until they were no longer afraid. Esther then asked if he would leave when they were awake. Devon told her he wasn't leaving, so let her take it easy and try to sleep in peace. Judy, who was lying next to her, was already asleep. The girl, closing her eyes, said that when she woke up, she hoped he would be there for her. All of a sudden, the door to the room opened and Ben came out. He asked how the master and mistress were. The Archduke replied that they were fine and sleeping. He also said he was worried for a reason because the girl has a trauma of rainy days and thunder. Judging from the reaction, she was bullied in the temple. Ben was very surprised when he heard this, because there was no such footage in the investigation. So the Duke said to find out about everything. Then he asked Ben to find out about the central temple and a candidate for sainthood named Lavian. Ben was surprised to hear that name, for she was the Duke of Brown's daughter. But Devon said that it didn't matter who she was. If it turned out that the girl had been bullied, anyone would be punished for it. When morning came, it was sunny and not rainy. The girl opened her eyes and found that she was not sleeping alone. Next to her lay a sleepy Judy and the Archduke. At this point, the girl was surprised that everyone stayed with her until the morning. She didn't think the Archduke would sleep either. She wondered if he stayed because he was afraid she would be scared at night. The girl thought that this must be what a real family is like. When the day came, everyone went about their business. Esther walked down the corridors and thought that the Ergerzog and Judy's brothers no longer asked her about the rainy days. They were very worried because she might have a hard time with the memories. By then she had walked into the room and saw Dennis sitting in a chair reading. She said hello to him. When he said hello back, the girl said that he always reads books. Dennis replied that some people say that books are food for the mind and knowledge gives strength. Afterward, he asked what she had been doing. Esther said that she was not doing anything important, but was just out for a walk. Afterward, she asked if she would go with him. He wants to walk in the garden of the Hafal. The girl wondered if she could. Dennis said that he would be bored walking alone, so let her go with him. After that, they went out into the yard and were heading towards the garden. Surprised, because it was the first time she had seen this road. She and Dorothy were going the other way. But then suddenly Dennis spoke up and said that first he would like to apologize because he had deceived her by saying they were going to the garden. He explained that there were a lot of employees at the mansion, and it wouldn't be easy to get out. Besides, it was the only way she would be able to go with him. The girl was surprised and asked why he would do that. Dennis said that Judy was very kind and just accepted her, but most he still doesn't think of her as his little sister, because he still has a lot to learn about Esther. When Dennis stayed up late one night in the living room reading books, he realized it was time for him to go to bed. When he went out into the hallway, he saw his brother walking somewhere. He wondered where he was going at this late hour, so the boy decided to follow his brother. When he listened to their conversation, he thought they seemed to be together, but Judy had already left. He didn't understand why the girl was so special that first her father fell in love with her. Now Judy. But Dennis thought he had to admit that she was smart enough. But he was curious. What kind of person Esther was. Every day he gets more and more interested because she reveals herself from different sides. They kept walking, but when they reached the fence they stopped next to a hole. The girl asked what it was. Dennis answered her angrily. "Don't you see, don't you? It's a dog hole." The girl thought she knew, but he said he didn't think she was his sister. But then why did he bring her to the dog hole? She thought maybe he wanted to throw her out through that hole. But the boy got on his knees and said they'd go through the hole. He explained that this way they wouldn't get caught and could escape. He needed to go to the village, so he told them to go together. But the girl still didn't understand why through the hole. Before climbing out, Esther asked exactly if she could go with him. The boy replied that if she didn't want to, she could safely stay home. Well, the girl shouted that she would go. After that, she crawled over the hole. It was smaller than she thought it would be. When the girl got to her feet, Dennis asked if she really went, but she replied that he had told her to follow him. She looked at her for a bit, and then said that so be it, they would go together, and they needed to hurry because they had a lot of places to go today. After a while, they finally reached the town. There were a lot of people who were busy doing their own things. The girl was very surprised to see so many people and different things. Dennis wondered if his father had met her by chance at the temple and what he liked about her. Suddenly, the boy interrupted their awkward silence and said that he had forgotten that he had somewhere to go. When the girl suggested that they could go together, he said that it was not necessary and that he would go alone. He then pointed to the corner and asked if she would wait for him. Over there. The girl was surprised that she would have to be alone all this time, but she had no choice. So she stood in the crowd and watched her new brother go somewhere, leaving her alone. After a while it began to get dark, and the girl thought he had left her. He suddenly suggested a walk. She suspected that was exactly what would happen. Esther figured she didn't like this fake family anyway, and she was going to leave them anyway. She felt a little sorry, remembering the moment she had woken up next to the Archduke and Judy. Suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by voices. They were several men who came up to her and asked why the little girl was standing alone in such a place. One of them said that he had not seen her before and, judging by her clothes, she was from a rich family. He asked the girl if it was true that she was unaccompanied. Some of the men said they could make good money off her parents because she was dressed in very expensive clothes and apparently grew up well off. The girl, after listening to them, asked if they could kill her. The men got angry and asked what she was even saying. Esther said it was useless to kidnap her because she had already been abandoned, which is why she is standing alone in the middle of the street now. The girl said they could just kill her without all the hassle of kidnapping her, and if they wanted, she could give them a knife. Suddenly, a familiar voice came from behind her and shouted her name. Esther was very surprised to hear it, for it belonged to Mr. Dennis. He came closer to her and told her that his business was a little slow. After that, he asked her who these people were and if she knew them. The girl did not know what to say. The bullies listened to all this and said, "What kind of day is this? Because aristocratic children are so fearless in the streets, and they're not afraid of anything at all. It's strange." Dennis, hearing this, said, "That's crazy. Do you have any idea who you're trying to threaten right now?" After his words, the men looked closely at the boy and recognized the color of his hair and eyes. They realized that he was the son of the Archduke, but they did not know that he also had a daughter. Dennis asked why they were standing there doing nothing. Weren't they going to threaten them? Then he said that if they tried to approach them, they would see for themselves what would happen to them. The men realized that they had to leave as soon as possible. While they weren't leaving, they began to talk to each other. "It's definitely Tertia. Well, did he have a daughter?" one asked. "I don't know, but they're so cocky. That's why it's best not to mess with them," the other answered him. When Dennis saw that the men had moved far enough away, he turned to the girl and asked what she was even thinking. But when he calmed down a bit, he said, "Okay, I'm sorry, I left you alone here on purpose." And he was just curious to see her behavior, because he thought she would show her real self. So he found an excuse to leave her alone. The girl thought it all made sense now, and she thought he hated her. That's why he decided to leave her. Dennis said he didn't want to put her in danger. Anton wondered what kind of life she had if she didn't hesitate to ask to be killed. He wondered why she was talking like she didn't value anything. After some thought, he apologized for checking up on her and said it wouldn't happen again, and that he hadn't left her. So he told her not to tell anyone else ever again that she wanted to die, and asked that she take care of herself. These words were strange enough for Esther, because she was a criminal just for living. After a while, Dennis said, "Also, remember, you have a family that cares a lot about you. That's it, let's go back." With these words, he held out his hand to her. Esther said that he had told her he didn't think she was his sister, hadn't he? The boy said he knew, but he took it all back. He said that's why let her never speak so lightly of death again. The girl agreed. She took his hand and they walked towards the house. She felt a little calmer. The next day, when it was time for breakfast, they sat down at the common table, and the Archduke turned to Dennis, asking if he had anything to tell him about yesterday. Dennis was surprised to hear this, but realized that it would be of no use to the doctor. So he said that he had been careless and that he shouldn't have done that. He was sorry, so he apologized. The Archduke said all was well and thanked him for his honesty. Then he told his sons that they might be embarrassed as they had spent very little time together. Who hasn't talked about what? Esther is now your sister and part of the family, so live together, said the Archduke. He added that he still wanted their opinions. He said that Dennis and Judy's birthday was coming up soon. When I didn't hear something, he said it was a stupid day because they wouldn't be able to recognize each other. But it would be a lot of fun. But Dennis said it would be too boring, and this time it would be good to have a discussion about what they read. Spend the time reading research on a larger space. When Esther heard this, it was unusual for her that they wanted to have a birthday party, because she hadn't heard of such a thing before. Devin interrupted the boys' joyful arguments by saying that this time he wanted to arrange something special. The children were surprised to hear this, and asked what exactly he wanted to do. The Archduke said that he wanted to introduce Esther to everyone on their birthday. When the girl heard this, she was shocked. He said he was going to gather everyone and present her at the twins' birthday party anyway. Gather everyone he could and that would be enough, the Archduke said. Judy said it was a very good idea, and this time he would rub that idiot Sebastian's nose in it. Something about telling him not to even think about using his sister for such a purpose. Esther didn't know what to do now. She didn't want to draw attention to herself and then eventually disappear. But in this case, it would be almost impossible to do so. The Archduke said their birthday was in 3 months, and until then he would hire a tutor for her. He thought that would be enough time to learn etiquette. He hoped she would have good memories afterward that could crowd out all the bad ones. The girl thanked him for that. After the meal, Devin returned to his office and Ben came in and said, "Archduke, as you said, I have chosen tutors who are educated enough to tutor Mistress Esther." He said they were all top academy graduates. The teacher he looked up to only takes 1 kid a year. But the Archduke didn't much understand what he was getting at. Ben said that this teacher was now teaching the Marquise's child, and they must have paid him a considerable sum. He told Ben to give him 3 times as much and bring him to him because money was no problem, and it would be even better if he didn't refuse to take care of the twins too. His assistant was very surprised that he wanted to give 3 times as much. When it came to his mistress, he spared nothing, but he was not so interested in his son's education. Also, Ben said he got some information. He said there was no conclusion of a candidate who was low in the temple, and no violence either. They almost never recruited commoners, and there wasn't nearly enough room for privacy in the temple. If violence did occur, it would be known immediately. The Archduke remained silent and said nothing. He thought her reaction was obvious. Ben said he had gotten information on the others as well. As expected, there is only one candidate named Lavienne. That means she is the daughter of Duke Browns. Devin asked if that information was accurate. Ben replied that it was. Well, before she succumbed to the temple, she was betrothed and chosen to be the next saint. It's very hard to say that a girl like that would bully anyone on the temple grounds. The Archduke shared his thoughts. When the Archduke heard all this, he thanked his assistant and said that he had done well, and also if he learned anything else, let him tell him at once. When investigated, no suspicious activity was found in the temple, and even afterward, no evidence of violence was found. But still, they did not understand what had happened in the temple that had left such an imprint on the girl. The next day, Esther sat in her room and drew. It was amazing to her, because it was possible to make good use of such expensive paper. When she used to be in the temple, she was scolded even if she drew on used paper. But now she has been given so many materials, and she can just enjoy the process in peace. It was a lot of fun for the girl. When Esther had finished her drawing, a maid came up to her. She was very surprised to see him. Dorothy couldn't believe her eyes that the lady had painted her portrait. She said she was always helping her, so it was a gift for her. The maid said that it was a work of art, and she had not known before that she had such great talent. She said she had to tell the Archduke right away. Esther immediately became nervous when she heard what the maid wanted to do, telling her not to do it because anyone could draw such a thing. It was unusual for the girl to hear compliments in her direction, because in the temple her drawings were only insulted. Everyone told her not to think that she was special, because it was very simple and anyone could draw it. But Dorothy insisted. She said the girl was a genius. No one would think a 10-year-old had drawn it. But he suddenly came into Denise's room. He asked what the noise was and what had happened, because Dorothy's voice could be heard all the way down the hall. When Esther saw him, she said, "Hello, Mr. Dennis." The boy sat down next to her and asked why she called Judy brother and him Mr. Dennis. When the girl asked what he meant, Dennis explained that it felt like he was a stranger to her. They are family now, so she can call him brother. At that moment, the girl thought that she had no idea that Mr. Dennis was even like that. Well, now she would call him brother. After a short silence, Dennis asked her if she liked books, because he had picked one up for her. Well, then suddenly he shifted his gaze to a piece of what papers were scattered on the floor and asked, "Did she draw?" The girl said they were just sketches. Dennis said that she seemed to like drawing a lot. The girl said that she liked it a little bit on principle. After that, he asked, "Can she draw it, or is it too difficult?" Esther said she was not that good at drawing. But then the maid suddenly intervened and said that the lady was a very good painter. After saying that, Dennis moved closer to her and asked, "So what's she drawing? Is she painting him?" The girl thought for a moment and said she would give it a try. Dennis then sat down on a chair and picked up a book, beginning to pose, while Esther sat across from him and drew. The boy shifted his gaze to her and thought that this is what she looked like when she was focused. Her eyes were sparkling with joy. But after a few minutes, the girl said she was finished. Dennis, closing the book, asked her to let him look at it. Esther said she was really bad at drawing, so she asked him not to expect much. She wondered what would happen if he was disappointed. At that moment, the boy picked up a piece of paper, and he was shocked. "Esther! What is this? You have such talent, and you kept quiet. It's amazing how well drawn it is." The boy could not believe that a little girl like her could draw so beautifully and truly like that. At that moment, Esther was surprised. She thought that anyone could do that and there was nothing special about it. The boy asked her if that's how they taught her to paint in the temple, but she said no. The boy asked her if she had been taught to draw in the temple, but she said she had not. Afterward, he patted her on the head and told her that such talent was something to be proud of and that she did well. Then the boy suddenly thought, "Why is he standing here?" He took only the drawing and ran to the butler Delbert to show the drawing. At that moment, the girl thought that she was good at drawing. She was happy to think that she could do something too. She really liked the praise, so she wanted more of it since no one had praised her before. When the Archduke returned to the manor, he was met by the butler and said, "It seems that today's training was not the most successful." The Archduke told him to keep quiet, because in a situation where war could break out at any moment, and everyone was so relaxed, the title of the Pillar of the Empire suffered. He couldn't rely on anyone. After that, he asked where Esther was now. Delbert replied that she was in the garden. The Archduke was surprised and asked, "Has she gone out for a walk?" To which the butler said that she was there painting. Devon was shocked. Butler said it turned out she was a very talented artist. He hadn't expected that at all. Then he asked where Esther was sitting right now, because he really wanted to see her drawings too. After that, the butler decided to escort the Archduke to the girl. She was sitting in the gazebo and was very concentrated on her work. When they got closer, the Archduke said she was so focused that she wouldn't even notice anyone else's presence. He was amazed by this concentration. At that moment, the butler thought that even the master sometimes acted like a child. The girl had just finished her drawing and was thinking of drawing something else. But suddenly she felt someone's eyes on her. When she turned her head, she saw the Archduke looking at her intently. She was frightened and asked him when he had come. Devon said he'd been here a while. When he heard that she was drawing, you had already come to the garden. And he also heard that she had already drawn something. And also Dennis. The girl was a little embarrassed, and she said that they were not the best drawings, but the Archduke did not listen to her. He said that Delbert had told him that her drawings were excellent. He then asked her if she could draw it. She was surprised, but the Archduke immediately said that if it was difficult for her, she could refuse. He would not force her. The girl said it wouldn't be hard for her. It was just that she was really bad at drawing. Devon smiled and said that, frankly, his office was a little empty, so he'd like to hang his portrait in it. You said that if she refused, he would have to hire another painter. At this point, the butler thought that the master was lying and not blushing, because last time he didn't understand why he needed a portrait. But the lady alone does not know this, another sign that he treasures her very much. His heart said so. He wants a portrait painted not by some artist, but by her. The girl said that if he was satisfied with a portrait that wasn't the prettiest, then she would agree. Afterward, he thanked Esther and told her to try harder. He was sure she'd do beautifully anyway. After a few minutes, Bina ran up to Delbert and said that he had heard that the Archduke was there. So he asked where he was sitting. Delbert showed him to the veranda and told him that Mrs. Esther was painting his portrait. When Ben heard this, he was shocked because the Archduke himself had said it was too cumbersome and he didn't need it. But that suddenly Devon looked at him angrily. So he complimented that this is how the Duke said in his dream, and in fact he really wants his portrait. Ben was able to read the look in his superior's eyes for him to shut up, because the child hears everything. Delbert said that Mrs. Esther is a very talented artist, and since she has had paper, she seems very happy. Ben looked at the Archduke once more, and thought it was strange enough, because no one would believe that a man who was called a monster all over the world could sit there with such a kind and awkward expression on his face. The girl continued to draw the portrait. She was distracted by Devon's voice, who asked her if she liked drawing. She replied that she liked it very much, so the Archduke asked if she would like to learn to draw some more. The girl was surprised to hear this. Devon said she could learn more than just drawing. She could learn whatever she liked, and if she wanted to learn something new, he would support her in anything. She didn't understand why he was so kind to her. Before, everyone had only oppressed and humiliated her, but now the Archduke wanted her to be happy. She thanked him. Devon said she could go to him any time and ask for anything she wanted. But the girl thought that she could not get used to such care, and she should always be ready to leave. In this short period of time, she's gotten a little used to this life, and it's going to be harder to part with each passing day. After a few more minutes, the girl said she had finished drawing. After that, she handed over the piece of paper and wondered what would happen if he was disappointed in her when he saw a bad drawing. When the Archduke looked at the drawing, he was shocked. Afterward, he told Ben to come to him. Afterward, he showed the drawing to his assistant. Ben didn't even know what to say. The drawing was one-to-one similar to the real Archduke. Ben said that he had heard that Madame was good at drawing, but this was a work of art. He said that in addition to beauty, something divine is felt in this drawing. The Archduke said that perhaps it was the influence of the temple. Afterward, he told Esther that such a talent should not be neglected. Ben and the butler agreed with him. "The banquet is coming up soon, isn't it? I'll be sure to take this portrait with me," said the Archduke. He then asked Delbert where his frame, which had won the auction at the Riven exhibition, had gone. The butler replied that Mr. Dennis had already taken it to hang his portrait. Devon remembered that his son had gotten such a gift too, after all. "Well then," she said, "that other frame will do too." So she asked that he prepare the largest grand one for him, and he would take it to the banquet. After giving out the instructions, the Archduke turned to his daughter and thanked her for this masterpiece, because he really enjoyed it so much. Esther was surprised. She thought he was very strict, but now he looked like the happiest man on earth. She felt very uncomfortable about it. That day something happened that was in no way expected at the banquet, because Archduke Monster was praising his daughter. He was very happy and proud of her. While he was sitting at the banquet, then some of the guests were discussing. "It seems like everyone is already in place. Of course, this is a very important meeting after all. Did the military training of the eastern part go well?" Two men were talking among themselves. "By the way, the past training was excellent. I heard thanks to the Archduke's instruction, everyone's skills have improved significantly," said one of the guests. Before that, the Archduke sat there and said nothing. Well, when he heard that everyone was beginning to praise him, he asked, "Do they really think so? And if they really think so—" And then he was interrupted by Ben, who came up to him. He said that everything was ready. When he heard that, he said, "Great, and have me his assistant bring it." At that moment, a huge canvas covered in white was brought into the hall. All the guests were shocked. They didn't realize what it was, but judging by the size, they guessed it was a frame. Then they assumed it was a painting. One of the guests said that he had not heard of any recent acquisitions of art objects. That suddenly their whispering was interrupted by the Archduke, who rose from his chair and asked, "Is everyone wondering what's true there?" After that, he went to the painting and opened the canvas. Underneath it was a portrait of him. When all the guests saw, or they were in shock, we moved closer and started looking at the portrait. "How beautiful and detailed," said one of the guests. "Is that the artist Furka? Or perhaps Ribbon?" Perhaps also Ribbon, who opened the last exhibition in Tertia. This is the first time I've seen this piece, people whispered among themselves. I too am very interested in art, but this is the first time I have seen this painting. We have seen a new hidden talent, the gentlemen said among themselves. There was another man standing next to them who looked at the painting and thought that the power that emanated from it was definitely divine. The Archduke said that all the names they mentioned above had left a great mark on the art and culture of the empire. But this picture was painted by none other than his daughter. When people heard this, they began to whisper even more. A daughter? The Archduke had a daughter? Maybe it's the one he adopted a few weeks ago. Ah, yes, I've heard of such a thing. Interrupting their whispers, the Archduke said that he thought they had already heard that he had recently adopted a child, and she was very dear to his sons. He plans to hold one event where he hopes to see each of them. People began to say admiringly that they would definitely come. When evening came and the meeting was over, Devon went out on his veranda and looked at the stars. He thought the moon was beautiful tonight. Standing behind him was a man named Benjamin. He told him that it was a great atmosphere for quiet conversations. The man came closer to him and said that it had been a very long time since they had seen the Archduke. Devon said that he thought they would not meet today. Benjamin replied that the wheels of the carriage had failed a bit, and that was why it was late. The Archduke laughed and said that he hadn't changed at all over the years, and that his chatter had kept him on the battlefield. The guy said he was exaggerating, and his face became very sad. When the Archduke noticed this, he asked what was wrong because the guy didn't look good. Benjamin said he was sorry to meet him after a long time and dared to ask, but he had one very serious request for him. What is it about this request that makes you so cautious? You know you're one of the few people I can trust, so speak up, don't be shy, said the Archduke. Benjamin wanted to tell him about the painting of that portrait. He asked if the princess had painted it herself. Devon was very surprised, but replied that she had painted it. At this moment, Benjamin thought that there was a powerful divine power embedded in the painting. Even the high priest of the empire couldn't put so much divine power into a single portrait. Unless it's a saint, but it's none other than the Archduke's adopted daughter. In other words, Princess Tertia, Benjamin added. The guy didn't understand how a person who didn't belong to the temple could possess such powerful divine power, and he didn't know how it could have happened. After a little silence, Benjamin asked the Archduke if he could ask the princess for Noah's portrait. When Devon heard this, he was very surprised, and he asked Benjamin if he still cared for this boy. But the boy said nothing, but only smiled at him. You are very kind, as always, the Archduke said. Benjamin said that it didn't matter to him that the others had turned their backs on him. He would always be there for them. Afterward, the boy asked if she could have her paint his portrait, because this young poor boy had been coping all by himself for a long time. And while he's alive, Benjamin really wants to at least have his portrait left. When the Archduke heard the story, he said that first he must speak to his daughter, because he respects her will, and he's not going to force her at all. Benjamin thanked him and said he understood. The Archduke wondered if he was doing the right thing. At this time, in their room, Esther and Dorothy stood by the table and looked at the flower. The maid said it was amazing and asked the girl if the hyacinth had always been so big. Dorothy said that the girl had gotten those seeds only a couple days ago, and she asked how she had managed to grow it so quickly. The maid admired the girl. Esther thanked her. In fact, hyacinths are sensitive to divine power, and once they receive the power, they grow with great speed. The girl thought she only wanted to check it out, but she didn't think the awakening would happen so soon. In her past life, she had this period before the divine power manifested. If she was caught, they would lock her in the temple again. So the girl wanted to escape before that happened. The next morning at the temple. Look, it's Lavienne. I heard she's been officially confirmed as a saint candidate this time, the girl said to her friend upon seeing Lavienne. That's why the priests even had their clothes altered especially for her. Lavienne really is a special girl. When the girl came to the door, she was greeted by a grown man and said, "Oh, you come every morning working so hard." Lavienne replied that it was no big deal, really just doing her job. The girl had a jug in her hands. When the guard saw it, he asked if it was medicine for Saint Cecilia. The man then said that she was so devoted to her and the girl had a very good heart, and he was sure that the goddess herself would watch over her. The girl thanked him for such warm words. Then the man took something out of his pocket and said that it was what she had asked for. Lavienne took the jar in her hands, and the man said he was counting on her. The girl said of course, and she would do anything for the empire and the goddess. After that, Lavienne went to the room of the saint. When she came in, she greeted Sesphia and told her that she had come. When the saint heard her voice, she asked if it was Lavienne. The girl answered that it was she, coming closer to the saint. She then said that she had brought medicine for her, and asked that she come up to take it. As she sat down on the bed closer to Sesphia, you asked how she was feeling. The saint said that she didn't know, but she thought that very soon this body would be finished, because she feels the goddess calling her to her. Lavienne got angry and yelled at her not to say such a thing because the girl doesn't want her to leave them. Afterward, she asked if she could ask the saint to stay a little longer. Sesphia lay back down and thanked her for that. The girl was very sad, and because of this she told the saint to wait, and she would give her the medicine. "Yes," agreed the saint, and the girl went to the table where the different jars stood. The girl remembered the man handing it to her and said it was a medicine that would help the saint. Duke Brown had specially singled him out by air for the sake of his temple and Lavienne. When the girl heard it was her father, she was very surprised by it. By the Duke's agreement and Lavienne's care, Saint Sesphia would find even more peace than she did now, next to the goddess. The girl thought about it and began to pour the contents of the bottle. After that she went up to the saint and said that here was her medicine ready. The girl told the saint to be sure to drink it all to the end. At that moment Dorothy was talking to Esther. She asked the maid to bring more seeds. When the maid heard this, she was surprised. Esther asked if they could do it. Dorothy replied that of course they could, and she would ask the gardener to do it. Even if the saint's awakening has begun, Esther may still have a little more time with her. Based on past lives, the awakening will take place in about 6 months. Divine power has the greatest influence on the life of the sprouts, and the hyacinth flowers are the most sensitive to divine power of all. So blooming a hyacinth is the quickest way to find out how far along the process is. Before awakening there is usually very little strength, and she was scolded every day for not being able to grow hyacinths in the temple yet. A few days later, when the gardener and other workers went out to the garden, they saw that a great many flowers had sprouted. One of the workers asked the gardener, "Have there always been so many hyacinths there?" The gardener replied that he himself did not know how it happened. He himself was shocked because they had appeared in one morning. "My goodness, what on earth is this? I think all this season's hyacinths are here," one of the workers said. Esther stood behind a tree and overheard their conversation. She didn't know what to do now because she didn't think there would be so many of them growing. She had been given a lot of seeds, but she thought they were just sprouts. At this rate, the awakening would take place in months, not 6 months. Esther wanted to get away from the Archduke before she was locked in the temple. Well, if her awakening is approaching at this rate, she thought it might already be time for her to leave. But she doesn't want to leave this place so soon. She'd gotten used to a lot of things in such a short time. She felt a little sad, but she tried to push those thoughts away. She realized it was too soon to relax. The girl didn't come there to have fun with her family, so she should close her heart again and not get attached. But then suddenly she felt the Archduke's hand on her head and asked what was wrong. Devon told her to be careful. After that, the Archduke got to his feet and asked her what was wrong, and said that if she didn't like that tree, they could cut it down. The girl waved her head and said that was not the point. The Archduke told her to be more careful because she had hurt herself, and he didn't know what to do about the wound on her forehead. Esther said it didn't hurt at all, but Devon lifted her hair and said, "How is it not hurting her when her forehead is all red?" At that moment he thought, this is what it means to have a daughter. He now began to worry about her hurting herself in an invisible place. After that he looked at the tree and thought that maybe he really should take it down. At that moment the Archduke shifted his gaze and saw that they had become very full of hyacinths. When the girl wanted to justify it somehow, Devon interrupted her immediately and said that he wanted to talk to her, so he offered to go somewhere else. The girl agreed. Afterward, they went to the arbor which was outside. When they sat down, the Archduke immediately asked the girl if, when she was in the temple, she had exuded divine power. Esther immediately shouted no, and asked why he was interested. He said that hyacinths had suddenly bloomed in the garden, and that flowers respond to divine power. The girl didn't know what to say in her defense. When Devin saw how nervous she was, he told her that she had done the right thing and not to apologize, because it was very beautiful. Afterward, he said that he actually brought her there because he had a request. He explained that there was a man who wanted to commission a portrait from her. The girl was surprised to hear this. The Archduke thinks this idea is very dangerous because Noah is in the sanctuary, and because of the circumstances of the empire, if he is caught, he could be heavily punished. When he saw the look on the girl's face, he said he would try to refuse him, but the girl said she agreed. When she saw that the Archduke was angry, she asked if he didn't want her to paint the portrait, and she thought that it wouldn't be hard for her. If someone needed her paintings, she would be happy about it. Devin told her that it could be very dangerous, and whether she was ready for it. The girl said she was ready for anything, and thought that death didn't scare her at all. The Archduke told her not to worry about anything, because she was his daughter, and he would always protect her. As he was about to leave, the girl asked him, "Archduke, did something happen at the temple?" Devin stooped down and said Anna had heard nothing that was worth worrying about. Afterward, he told the girl that everything would be fine and not to worry. After their conversation, Esther immediately gathered her things and was on her way to the place where she was to paint. When they had traveled some time, the carriage stopped, and the heap told her that from this place she would have to go alone. He showed her a path and told her that along this road there is a hut she will have to draw a portrait of who lives inside it. When the girl heard him say that, she went straight there. It was only supposed to take 2 hours. When the girl heard that, she was surprised, and Coachman repeated that she should have time to draw it in that time. When the girl entered the house, she realized her senses were right. And this was the sanctuary. It was surprising to her that it was in such a remote place, because all shrines must be run by a temple. Esther suggested that it must be a secret place. As she walked by, she felt a sudden coldness. She looked at the door and realized that the cold was coming from the room. After that, she opened the doors and went inside. Looking at the beds, she realized there was someone there. When Esther came closer to the bed, she looked closely at the boy. She recognized him and realized that she had seen him somewhere before. But she quickly dismissed those thoughts from her mind because she realized that now was not the time, and she only had 2 hours. So she should draw it as soon as possible and not think about other things. The girl started to take out the canvas and sat down to start painting. She thought that she was very awkward, and it was the first time she would be painting a sleeping person. Esther began to scrutinize the boy lying on the bed and thought he was very handsome, even with his eyes closed. In all her life, she had never seen anyone prettier than Lavienne, though the Archduke and brothers are pretty enough too. Esther continued to stare at the boy, and didn't understand why she had such a familiar feeling, as if she had seen this man just recently. Esther decided to put those thoughts aside and start drawing. When she got to the point of drawing his eyes, she thought that his eyes were closed. If he opens, she can remember. Besides, she doesn't know what he looks like with his eyes open and won't be able to draw them. If he does continue to sleep, she won't be able to finish in time. But she realized that she needs to speed up her drawing as much as possible. The girl continued drawing and realized that she was beginning to get bored with it all. She had the feeling that her strength was going away. When she wanted to look at her watch, she noticed that the boy's arm was sticking out. She wondered if it had always been like that. She thought it must be cold. Then the girl put her pencil on the easel and sat down beside him. She didn't know who he was, but she wondered why he was sleeping in such a place and alone. Esther asked if he was lonely, because when she was locked in the temple, she was very lonely. She hoped he would get well as soon as possible, and so that he wouldn't be lonely, she decided to share a little about her divine power with him. After a while, she thought, she hadn't even noticed that the painting had caused her to use up her power. She still wasn't used to that kind of thing. Then she realized that she needed to finish the painting as soon as possible. When she wanted to let go of the boy's hand, he grabbed it. Esther was very frightened when he did this because he was asleep. The stranger then opened his eyes and asked who she was. The girl started to apologize and tried to explain what she was doing here, but she didn't have time to finish. Esther didn't know what to do now because she didn't think he would suddenly wake up, so she decided she needed to apologize. But the boy sat on the bed and asked who she was and how she got there. The girl became very scared. Stammering, she said that she had been asked to draw his portrait. Afterwards, she apologized and said that she did not want to wake him up. She would never do such a stupid thing. But the boy wasn't listening to her. He was surprised that she was drawing his portrait. "So it's true. I only wanted to quietly draw a portrait and I didn't notice myself starting to worry," Esther said, squeezing his hand. Esther said that the only thing left to do was to finish the eyes, and then the portrait would be ready. The boy continued to wonder, but he asked what her name was. The girl was silent for a while, but then said her name was Esther. When the stranger heard this, he lit up with joy. "Are you really Esther? I'm not dreaming. Is this real?" The girl was surprised to hear that he thought he was asleep. She asked him to let go of her hand because he kept holding it. She thought his face was becoming more and more familiar. "By the way, Esther, you've come to draw me, haven't you?" A moment the girl thought that he apparently wasn't going to let go of her hand, and was only squeezing them tighter. Esther said that she had been asked to do so. The boy said that he understood and was glad that she had come there because of him. He thought it must have been Benjamin. The girl said that all she had to do was draw the eyes, and she would finish and leave and not bother him again. When the boy heard this, he was surprised and asked why she would leave. Esther replied that she had been told she had to be back within 2 hours. When the boy heard this, he said, "I see. You were only allowed to stay here for 2 hours. Then, Esther, can you finish next time?" The girl was surprised to hear this. The boy explained that she had told him, after all, that only the eyes were left. If he closes them now, she won't be able to finish. He told her to come back next time and finish then. Esther didn't understand what was wrong with this man, why he was acting this way, or what he wanted her to come again for. The girl said that if he asked for it, then she would finish it next time. She thought it was wrong. So after a short silence, she said that she was not personally asked to come here. The boy said it was okay, and he would make arrangements. Esther didn't understand what was happening or why he wouldn't let go of her hand. She thought the boy was strange. When he looked at her, he winked, and immediately said he felt sick. Esther became worried and said, "What's so sudden? What's your pain?" The boy pulled her hand to his lips and kissed it. Afterwards he said that, frankly speaking, he was suffering from a disease that could not be cured by ordinary medicines. He explained that he had been living there alone since he was a kid. No one was around, and he had never even dated a girl. Esther said that it was very sad. There was a need for companionship. At that moment the boy thought that she was very kind. After that, he sat down on the edge of the couch and said he was very glad he had met her. After that, he asked what was going on outside. Esther said it was a very remote place, and it was difficult to get there. She said it was a sanctuary hidden from the outside world, so the boy was very glad that someone had come to see him. The girl thought that she had only come for the portrait, but she did not say anything to him. Wondering how long he'd been there alone, she, of all people, understood what it was like. At that moment, a memory surfaced in her when she was in the temple and she was locked in the dungeon. Esther was screaming for help. She was wrong, and she would never do anything wrong again. The girl was begging to be let out. She sat on the floor and knocked on doors. She asked for someone to save her, but no one answered. She did not give up and kept knocking. Esther immediately pushed that sad memory away. The boy looked at her questioningly and asked, "What is she thinking about?" Esther was startled by the question and quickly blurted out that it was nothing, everything was fine. "Really? All right, so you'll come next time?" the boy asked. When the girl answered nothing, he put his hand on hers and said that he really wanted to see her again. Esther didn't understand if she was allowed to make such big and complicated decisions. She said she would ask if she was allowed, then she would come. When the boy heard this, he was very happy and said that she had promised, so she would definitely have to come. After that, the girl gathered all her painting supplies and went outside the door to the street. The boy stayed on the threshold, waved, and said, "Well, I'll see you again, Esther. I'll look forward to our next meeting." As the girl walked to the meeting place to be taken home, she thought of the child who slept in the hidden sanctuary. Very mysterious and somehow special, but he looked insanely lonely. Esther thought that if they met again, they might even become friends. That same evening at the temple, Lavienne was walking toward the saint again. When she passed one of the elders, he said hello, and told her he was relying on her. The girl went through the doors again and said that it was Lavienne. but she was very much surprised when she saw that the saint was not lying down. Sesfia stood near the window and stared mesmerized at the light. The girl walked in and didn't understand why she was standing. Lavienne thought that the poison had made her like a living corpse. The girl did not understand why this happened, for she had increased the dose so that the saint should lie down. Suddenly Cecilia spoke and said that the goddess had sent a revelation to her. The saint continued to speak and said that the child who would become a saint would have the greatest power. She told Lavienne to find her and save the empire from disaster. Lavienne was very surprised when she heard this, and wondered what catastrophe meant. She assumed that the goddess had sent her a revelation because the saint was at death's door. Lavienne told the saint that it was just marvelous that she was hearing the voice of the goddess, and asked who the next saint would be. But Sesfia remained silent and just stared out the window. The girl thought she was no longer conscious, but after a few seconds, the saint spoke and said that the next goddess would be a noble girl born at the bottom of the empire. Her eyes are pink like flowers, and her gray-brown hair resembles the earth. When Lavienne heard this, she was furious. But then suddenly the saint seemed to wake up. She did not understand what was happening or what she was saying. Lavienne answered her, "Have you come to your senses yet? You said you had a revelation about the next saint." Sesfia was surprised at this, and said that this could not be, for she was still alive, and she looked at the girl. Lavienne smiled and said, "But you said it yourself, and that the next saint has gray-brown hair and pink eyes." The saint said that couldn't be, for the only candidate was the Duke. But she did not finish and cut short her words, saying that she seemed to be talking in her sleep. After all, she was still alive, and it was too early for the next saint to appear. Lavienne agreed with her. Sesfia said she would go get some rest and went straight to her bed. A saint every 3 generations is born into Duke Brown's family. This was a promise to the goddess and to the empire. Therefore, the next saint should be none other than Lavienne. But she did not understand, for the revelation spoke of gray-brown hair. She couldn't even guess who it was about. She remembered her father saying as a child, "Listen carefully, Lavienne. You were born to be a saint, and don't you dare think of any other life." Her father told her to remember that her future was only to become a saint. Lavienne said she remembered everything, and would definitely become a good saint to make him proud of her, so he could take it easy. When Lavienne left Saint's room, she closed the door and thought it might have been senile marasmus or something else. As promised by the goddess, a saint is born into the Browns family every 3 years. It's a tradition that has been passed down from generation to generation since the founding of the empire. As the girl walked down the hallway, she thought that surely Saint must have been hallucinating due to the fact that she was already at death's door, so she couldn't be trusted much. Suddenly she spotted an old acquaintance and said, "Kane, come here." The guy quickly walked over to her and said that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Kane said that he left her a letter and a gift from the lady, for she was very worried about her, for Lavienne had to labor alone in the temple. Lavienne thanked him for that, but Kane said he had another message from the Duke. He plans to visit the temple soon, and says he has high hopes for his daughter. Lavienne wanted to ask one more thing, but Kane quickly interrupted her and said that he was still asleep, so he couldn't get an answer. The girl was surprised and asked, "Again? But why has it been 3 months already?" Lavienne said he should have been awake by now. Kane didn't know what to say to that. At this point, the girl thought it was better to keep her mouth shut. The relationship between the temple and the imperial family wasn't the best as it was, but it might mean that there were no more priests watching over him. Noah has a very rare disease that requires a great deal of divine power. Without a periodic infusion, he would die. Lavienne couldn't let that happen. At home about it, Lavienne told Kane that he did a good job and also asked him to come back in 4 days to get a return letter for his mom. Lavienne said that on her next outing, she would go to Noah and asked him to prepare properly. When Kane heard that, he got nervous and tried to talk her out of it. He said that now is not a good time because she is in the spotlight for becoming the next saint. If she goes to Mr. Noah at a time like this, but Lavienne interrupted him and said, "So what? What's going to happen? He is my fiancé after all. Can't I visit my fiancé?" When the man tried to object, the girl said that everything would be fine and no one would know. She also asked him to make sure that her father didn't know about it either. At this point, the girl started to walk away and thought, Well, wait for me, Noah. I'll come to you soon. The next morning, a boy woke up in a remote hut. He looked at his hand and thought he felt much better than before. Until then, no matter what power he received, his condition had never improved so much. This news pleased him. He remembered his last night's guest and thought that he wanted to meet Esther again. But then, he suddenly heard the door creak open. With that, the doors opened to his room and he saw Benjamin in front of him. "Mr. Noah, how are you? When did you manage to wake up?" "I thought you'd never wake up," the man said. Noah apologized to him for making him worry and asked how long he had been sleeping. Benjamin replied that it had been 3 months, and he'd slept much longer this time than the previous times. The boy smiled and thought that he had fallen asleep for a long time. Then he asked Benjamin if he had sent Esther to him. When the man heard that, he was a little surprised. Benjamin said that meant it was the princess who woke him up. After that, he asked if Noah was feeling well. The boy answered that he felt better than ever, so much so that he didn't even need a temple next to Esther. Benjamin said that was all fine, of course, but Noah immediately interrupted him and said that everything was fine and he knew everything. "She is the adopted daughter of Archduke Tertia, isn't she?" the boy asked. When Benjamin heard that, he was very surprised and asked how he knew that. Noah thought he had seen this in a dream, but he didn't know what to do now, because in order for him to continue living, Esther must always be there for him. But the Archduke is not so simple. Noah said he wants to see Esther again, and asked if he could get her here. Benjamin said he would talk to the Duke, but he wasn't sure if he would allow it. The boy thought it was obvious since the Archduke is very strict. Benjamin said that another boy had received a message from Mrs. Lavienne. When he heard it, he was very surprised. Benjamin said that Lavienne says he'll pick a date and visit him on his next outing. Noah was shocked when he heard that, but he replied that he would bear it in mind, and asked that Benjamin send a message to the Archduke, and arrange for Esther to come to him as soon as possible. Lavienne and Noah's bond was still unbreakable, but the boy realized that it was finally time to put an end to it, starting with the evil fate that had brought them together. And then he can finally go to Esther and be happy. That same day, Ben found Noah at the Archduke's estate, telling him that Mr. Judy had safely entered the Academy's short-term fencing training camp. He said he would send letters during those 3 weeks. Devin said he understood and that Judy would do fine there. No matter where he went, the boy would always be sociable. Ben also told me about the tutor, that the written interview went well. He said he wanted to meet in 2 days. He himself thought that the gentleman was very attentive to matters related to Mrs. Esther. The Archduke said that he hoped the girl would enjoy both the teacher and the lessons. As they passed the room, he looked up and saw her. The girl sat alone and looked out the window. Devin wondered what she was doing alone in the room. Esther sat there thinking that he hadn't left her mind since that day, but she hadn't even asked him his name. She wondered who he was after all. Esther realized that if they met again, she would have to know his name, and maybe she would even ask him to be her friend. But suddenly, the Archduke called out to her, distracting her from her thoughts. He came closer to her and told her that he came to her with good news and asked if he could sit next to her. The girl said of course he could, and he didn't even have to ask about that. As they sat down on the couch, the girl asked, "My tutor? That's what Arter said. He was the best student at the academy, and now he's improving his skills by working as a tutor. This man still has little experience, but he is very talented, so the girl will be able to learn a lot from him." Esther was still surprised. No one had taken care of her until now, and she didn't understand why the Archduke was doing it. Esther thanked him and said that she would definitely try her best not to let him down. Devin said he hoped she would. After a while, Denise, sitting on the couch in the room, said that they were gathered there because the tutor for Esther was coming today. The girl and the Archduke didn't understand why they were gathered and what was even going on. When Dennis looked at his father, he asked why he was so nervous. Devin said that he was not the least bit nervous and said that he would very much like to sit in class with Esther. When the Archduke heard this, he was surprised and said that his own son had said that he could only concentrate on lessons when he was sitting alone. Denise confirmed this and said that maybe the lessons with Esther would be done differently, and he would be comfortable with that as well. When Devin heard this, he was very surprised because his son had never liked group activities. It was very strange. Well, then suddenly Dorothy came into their room and told the Archduke that the carriage with the tutor had just entered the residence. After a while, everyone went downstairs and greeted the tutor. The man came in and said his name was James Griffiths. "It's nice to meet you. Come on in, my name is Devon Tertia," Devon said, pointing to the tutor where to go. After that, they went to a room where they sat down on a sofa, and the tutor told them to get acquainted. He then pointed to Dennis and Esther, who were sitting next to him, and said that they were his children. "Hello? I'm the oldest. Dennis, my twin brother's name is Judy. He's not here since he's at the academy," said Dennis. After that, a girl spoke up and said her name was Esther Tertia, and she was a junior. The tutor said that today he would only give a simple and introductory lesson, and they would talk about the contract when it was finished. Erzgersik said that he agreed to such terms and asked that he begin. At that moment a maid came into the room and said that she would escort them to the study room. James thanked her for that. While they were walking, the tutor decided to ask the Archduke a question. "I'm sorry. This is a bit of a strange question, but you will also be attending class. Why can't you? I want to watch it in person and give an evaluation," said the Archduke. At that moment the teacher thought that apparently he loved and cherished his children very much. Dennis asked him if he could go with them, and the teacher agreed. When they got to the study, everyone took their seats. The Archduke looked at his children and thought they were much closer. When class started, Esther learned a lot of new things. She had heard a lot about the history of the Austin Empire and mythology at the temple, but she thought it was fun and interesting to study them from a different perspective.